The cameras were rolling, the lights bright, and the studio audience holding its collective breath. On one side of the stage stood Representative Eric Swalwell, a smirk etched across his face, ready to deliver another condescending blow. On the other side, Karoline Levitt, young, sharp, unflinching, stood tall with her hands firmly on the podium. The debate topic was immigration policy, but it had already veered into something far more personal. Eric leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he raised his voice so everyone could hear, "You know nothing." His words sliced through the studio like a blade, echoing with a cruel arrogance designed to belittle. The audience gasped, some even laughed nervously. He thought he had won in that moment, reducing Karoline to nothing more than a caricature of inexperience. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she locked eyes with him, her chin slightly raised, as though the insult bounced off her like rain on steel. The silence that followed his outburst gave her power, an invisible stage to reclaim control. She waited, letting the audience's tension thicken. Cameras zoomed in on her face, calm, collected, but with a spark in her eyes that warned of the storm about to come. Her reputation preceded her. This wasn't the first time Karoline had been underestimated by establishment voices or career politicians who thought they could use their age or status as a shield against criticism. But tonight, in this charged atmosphere, she was determined to remind not just Eric but the entire country that words thrown like daggers often miss when the target is ready. The studio, the viewers at home, even Eric himself didn't know it yet, but his insult had just set up the very moment that would spiral out of his control. Karoline leaned slightly toward her microphone, pausing just long enough to make everyone lean forward in anticipation. Then she spoke, not with anger, not with hesitation, but with razor-sharp clarity. Her clapback wasn't just a reply, it was a lesson, a rebuke, and a declaration all at once. And within seconds, the balance of the debate began to shift. The insult still hung in the air, "You know nothing." But Karoline wasn't rattled. Instead, she leaned into the silence, turning the very absence of sound into her ally. The audience, uncertain of what would come next, quieted down. Cameras captured every flicker of her expression, steady eyes, lips pressed into a half-smile that suggested she had heard worse and wasn't about to let it slide. She slowly adjusted the microphone, almost ceremonially, as though preparing for a verdict. Eric shifted in his chair, the smirk fading slightly. He didn't realize it yet, but Karoline was about to turn his weapon into his undoing. Her voice cut through the silence, low, precise, and charged with authority. "Congressman," she began, pausing long enough for the audience to lean in, "you've been in Washington for over a decade, and the only thing you've mastered is shouting down people who threaten your comfort." The line was delivered so cleanly that murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eric's face flushed, his hand twitching toward his notes. But Karoline wasn't done. She raised her hand, palm open, commanding the room. "You want to talk about knowing nothing? Let's talk about the families who know exactly what it means when fentanyl crosses our borders unchecked. Let's talk about the small businesses that know the weight of taxes you keep raising while you enjoy your perks. Let's talk about the parents who know their children are being left behind while you sit here, pretending insults are policy." Each sentence hit like a gavel, punctuated with a rhythm that made it impossible to look away. The audience, sensing the shift, began nodding. Some even clapped before being hushed again. Eric tried to interrupt, but Karoline's momentum was unstoppable. She leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "The difference between you and me, Congressman, is that I know what the people live every day, you only know the echo of your own voice." The studio erupted. Applause drowned out the moderator's attempt to regain control. Social media lit up in real time as the clip of Karoline's response was clipped, tweeted, and shared before the debate was even over. What Eric thought was his moment of dominance had transformed into a viral takedown, one that would follow him for weeks. Karoline hadn't just defended herself, she had shifted the narrative, exposing Eric's arrogance for the entire nation to see. Eric tried to recover. He straightened his tie, forced a laugh, and attempted to brush off Karoline's words as if they were nothing more than political theater. "That's cute," he said, raising his voice, "but you're cherry-picking anecdotes. You don't understand the complexity of governing. This isn't about sound bites, it's about policy. He leaned toward the camera as though to reclaim authority, but the audience had already shifted. His words came across as defensive, a man scrambling to patch a sinking ship. Karoline seized on it. She didn't flinch, didn't let the momentum slip. Instead, she leaned back casually, the kind of body language that said, "I own this stage." Then, she delivered her counterpunch with surgical precision. "If you want to talk about policy, Congressman, let's do it. You voted to increase spending by trillions while middle-class families drown in inflation. You voted against securing the border, and now thousands of Americans pay the price every week. You want to brag about complexity? Complexity is just the mask you wear to cover up failure." The crowd gasped, then broke into applause again. Eric's attempt to steer the narrative toward seriousness had been hijacked in seconds. Karoline wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking past him, directly to the millions watching online and at home. Every line was clipped perfectly for social media, her words destined to dominate TikTok feeds, Twitter threads, and Instagram reels. The moderator, clearly struggling, tried to move on. But Karoline wasn't finished. She gestured toward Eric with open disdain. "This is what Americans are sick of. Politicians who condescend, who tell them they don't understand, who talk down instead of listening. Congressman, they understand perfectly. They understand every time their paycheck doesn't stretch to the end of the month. They understand when their communities are less safe. They understand when their kids can't get a decent education. They don't need your lectures, they need leaders who will fight for them." By now, the audience was electrified. Eric sat back, visibly rattled, his earlier arrogance draining away. He shuffled his papers, trying to regroup, but Karoline had already claimed the moment. The debate wasn't about him anymore, it was about her ability to channel the frustration of ordinary people and fire it back with a clarity that cut through Washington doublespeak. Clips of the exchange were already trending. Hashtags like #Karoline Clapback and #Swalwell Shutdown raced through the digital bloodstream of the nation. Eric's words, "You know nothing," were being turned into memes, GIFs, and parody remixes. And every version ended the same way, with Karoline's line, sharp and undeniable, landing like a gavel at the end of a trial. Eric's face tightened as if the mask he had worn for years in Washington was finally cracking. He leaned forward, his voice sharper now, desperation bleeding into every syllable. "You think you can just throw around talking points and win applause? You don't know the first thing about compromise, about legislating, about responsibility. You're nothing but a provocateur." His tone rose, and the moderator had to hold up a hand to keep him from speaking over Karoline. But Karoline didn't need to be shielded. She met his glare with a steady, unblinking stare, letting him burn himself out in front of millions. And when he finally stopped to catch his breath, she struck. "Provocateur?" she said with a slow smile. "No, Congressman, that's what you call someone who tells the truth when it makes you uncomfortable. I provoke because Americans are done with lies. I provoke because families are tired of broken promises. And I provoke because every time you say, compromise, it means the American people lose a little more." The audience roared. Eric's shoulders slumped, his attempt at dominance backfiring spectacularly. He reached for his water, sipping nervously, while Karoline pushed further, her voice ringing with conviction. "You call me irresponsible? Here's what's irresponsible: spending money we don't have, sending troops to wars we shouldn't fight, letting our border collapse, and pretending it's all under control. That's your record. And the people in this room, and across this country, are sick of it." The moderator tried once more to pivot, but Karoline leaned in, ensuring her words landed like a hammer blow. "You can shout at me all you want. You can call me names, dismiss me, try to paint me as naive, but every time you do, you remind Americans that you're afraid of being held accountable. And tonight, Congressman, accountability has a face." The camera zoomed in on Karoline as she delivered the line, her composure unshaken, her expression resolute. Eric looked smaller now, not because of stature, but because of how thoroughly the moment had slipped away from him. The internet was already buzzing, with clips flooding social media feeds, her smile, her cutting delivery, and his visible unraveling. Eric had come in expecting to dismantle her. Instead, he was the one dismantled, piece by piece, on live television. Eric's composure finally cracked. His face flushed red, and instead of measured arguments, what came out was raw anger. You know nothing about governing. You're a child playing politics on a stage built by adults. People like you are why America is falling apart. You're dangerous, you're reckless, and frankly, you don't belong here. The moderator froze, stunned by the ferocity of his outburst. Gasps rippled through the audience, the kind that happens when the mask of professionalism is ripped off and raw hostility shows underneath. Eric jabbed his finger across the table toward Karoline, his voice shaking with rage. You're nothing but a puppet, just another loudmouth trying to grab attention. But Karoline didn't flinch, she didn't blink. She leaned forward slightly, let the silence linger, and then, with her voice low but cutting, delivered the blow. Congressman, the louder you yell, the more the American people see the truth, that you're not angry at me, you're angry at yourself. You've been in Washington for years, and what do you have to show for it? Rising crime, open borders, endless wars, and a debt our children can never repay. You call me dangerous? No, sir, you are the danger. Because you're proof that failure can hide behind a suit and a microphone for decades. The audience erupted, half cheering, half stunned at her audacity. Social media exploded instantly, hashtags lit up, clips went viral, and the narrative flipped in real time. Instead of Karoline being exposed as inexperienced, Eric was trending worldwide, for losing his cool and showing the very arrogance she had accused him of. Karoline pressed harder, her voice rising over the noise. If you think shouting at me will silence me, you've learned nothing about this country. The people are tired of career politicians who insult and intimidate instead of answering to the truth. And tonight, millions just saw you for what you are. Eric slumped back in his chair, visibly shaken. He tried to interject, but the damage was done. The debate wasn't his anymore. Karoline had taken his outburst, flipped it, and used it to show exactly why she was on that stage in the first place. The room felt different now. The audience wasn't just watching a debate, they were watching a political implosion. Eric had lost control, and Karoline, instead of shrinking back, stepped right into the vacuum. She leaned toward the microphone with calm, deliberate precision, the kind of composure that told everyone she was still in command. Ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear. When a congressman screams at a young woman instead of answering the question, it's not a debate, it's desperation. And tonight, desperation is all he's offering America. The crowd broke into a wave of applause. Cameras zoomed in as Eric sat stiffly, his jaw locked, his hand tapping nervously on the table. Karoline seized the moment like she had rehearsed it her entire life. She didn't raise her voice, didn't match his anger, instead, she stripped it bare. You say I know nothing, Congressman? Then tell the American people what you know. Tell them why crime is higher in your own district than it's ever been. Tell them why your votes keep sending billions overseas while families here can't afford groceries. Tell them why, after all your years in power, Americans are poorer, less safe, and more divided. Because if you can't answer that, then maybe it's you who knows nothing. The moderator tried to interject, but the audience drowned it out with thunderous cheers. Every word Karoline spoke seemed to ricochet across the hall. People weren't just clapping, they were standing. It was the kind of reaction that couldn't be scripted. On social media, the clip went nuclear. Within minutes, hashtags like hashtag Karoline vs. Eric and hashtag truthbomb surged to the top. Commentators began cutting in live, analysts whispering that they hadn't seen a takedown like this in years. Eric wasn't trending because of his arguments, he was trending because Karoline had made him lose control, and because she had turned that weakness into proof of everything she'd said. Karoline smiled faintly, letting the roar wash over her. Then she delivered the dagger line, the one that would echo across every platform before the night was over. America doesn't need another career politician shouting insults. It needs leaders who will fight for its people with clarity, conviction, and courage. And tonight, we saw the difference. Eric's face fell. For the first time that evening, he looked less like the experienced congressman and more like a man who realized the debate wasn't just lost, it was his legacy slipping away. The debate stage was no longer a contest of words, it had become a symbolic battleground between the old guard and the rising generation. Eric sat hunched, his face visibly tense, while Karoline stood tall, unshaken, feeding off the energy of the crowd. She wasn't just responding anymore, she was redefining the entire exchange, turning his collapse into proof that the political establishment had run out of steam. She leaned slightly forward, her voice measured but powerful. This is exactly what America is tired of. Shouting, finger-pointing, excuses. That's not leadership. That's weakness. And the truth is, Congressman, your anger tonight says more about the state of Washington than any of my words could. The crowd erupted again, but this time, Karoline didn't pause for applause, she pressed on, knowing momentum was everything. For years, the same politicians have recycled the same promises. They've shouted down their critics, ignored the truth, and silenced fresh voices. And what has it gotten us? Higher costs, weaker borders, more division. If you want to see the failure of the status quo, just look at the meltdown we've witnessed tonight. Viewers at home were glued to their screens. Analysts watching from studios across the country began to shift their tones. Commentators who often dismissed Karoline as too young or too bold suddenly found themselves replaying her lines in disbelief. Eric hadn't just lost his temper, he had lost the narrative, and Karoline had seized it with surgical precision. Twitter lit up, she just buried him with facts. This is the moment everything changes. Eric tried to break her, but she broke the entire old playbook. Karoline turned back toward Eric with a calm, piercing stare. Congressman, you wanted this to be about me. But tonight, America saw the truth, it's about you. It's about the failure of a broken system that screams at young voices instead of listening to them. And the fact that you can't control your temper only proves what I've said all along. Washington is terrified of change. The moderator tried to regain order, but the energy in the hall was no longer his to control. The crowd leaned forward, fully in Karoline's corner, sensing that they were witnessing more than a debate, they were watching a generational shift unfold live. The silence after Karoline's words was heavier than any outburst. Eric's shoulders slumped, his earlier thunder reduced to scattered frustration, while the crowd's anticipation only grew. Everyone in the room sensed that she was about to deliver the kind of moment that etches itself into political memory, the point where the underdog becomes the voice of an entire generation. Karoline stepped closer to the edge of the stage, no longer speaking just to Eric, but to America itself. Let me be crystal clear, this is not about one congressman losing his cool. This is about a broken system that lashes out when challenged. Washington wants you to think young leaders should sit down, stay quiet, and wait their turn. But here's the truth, America doesn't have time to wait. Families can't afford to wait. Our border security can't wait. Our freedom can't wait. And I won't wait. The audience thundered with applause, their cheers cutting through Eric's muttered protests. She wasn't just rebutting him anymore, she was reframing the entire debate, making herself the embodiment of urgency. She pointed lightly toward him, not with contempt but with finality. You see, Congressman, the louder you shout, the more people at home realize you're not fighting me, you're fighting change. And change is coming whether you like it or not. Camera operators instinctively zoomed in. Viewers saw a young leader with poise, conviction, and command, standing firm while her opponent unraveled. Networks scrambled to prepare instant analysis, knowing this clip would dominate the news cycle. On social media, hashtags exploded, hashtag Karoline owns the stage, hashtag end of the old guard, hashtag truth over noise. Millions began sharing her words within seconds, captions reading, "She didn't just debate, she rewrote the rules." Even the moderator leaned back, visibly shaken by the shift. What had begun as a tough night for Karoline had transformed into a spectacle where she not only endured the establishment's fire but used it to fuel her rise. The stage lights glared, the microphones hummed, and in that electric air, one truth crystallized. Karoline Leavitt had turned Eric Swalwell's most aggressive attack into the clearest sign that his era, and the politics of rage, was on its way out. The air buzzed with the sense that history was tilting. Eric had gone quiet, his earlier shouting lost in the roar of applause that washed through the hall. Karoline didn't rush, she let the silence hang, letting the cameras drink in the contrast between a rattled career politician and a young voice standing steady under fire. Her tone softened, but her words cut deeper. For decades, Americans have been told the same tired story, that their problems are too big, that their voices are too small, that the people in this town will handle it for them. But look around, Washington hasn't handled anything. Families are still struggling, our borders are still broken, and our freedoms are still under attack. What Congressman Swalwell shouted tonight wasn't a defense of the people, it was a defense of his own career. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by another surge of cheers. She didn't just rebut him, she put him on trial in front of the nation. Karoline leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying across the stage with conviction. I'm not here to play their game. I'm here because millions of Americans are sick of watching elites fight for themselves while ordinary people pay the price. So if that makes me their enemy, so be it. But let me warn you, if you try to shout me down, you're not silencing me. You're silencing every mother who can't afford groceries, every worker whose paycheck is swallowed by inflation, and every community begging for security and respect. And I won't let you silence them. The crowd rose to its feet. People who had come as skeptics were now cheering her name, while pundits on live feeds scrambled to keep up. On Twitter, the clip was already viral. Journalists wrote in real time, Karoline just turned the debate into a generational showdown. Eric's advisors looked rattled, his face a mask of frustration. For him, this was no longer a debate, it was a collapse unfolding in public view. Karoline let the final words land like a hammer. America doesn't need louder politicians. It needs stronger truth-tellers. And tonight, that truth was heard. And with that, she didn't just win the exchange, she defined it. The hall was no longer just a debate stage, it had become a battlefield of narratives, and Karoline stood at the center, the clear victor. The camera zoomed in on her face, illuminated by the stage lights, as chants of her name rolled like thunder across the room. Eric sat back in his chair, visibly deflated, his earlier bravado dissolved into silence. Karoline didn't gloat. Instead, she raised her hand to quiet the crowd and delivered words that turned the moment from a political win into a generational declaration. This is not about me. This is about you, the people who have been told to sit down, shut up, and accept crumbs while Washington feeds itself. Tonight, you saw the truth, their power only exists if you stay quiet. But when you rise, when you demand to be heard, no one, not Eric, not anyone, can drown you out. The audience erupted again, and millions at home felt a surge of recognition. Hashtags exploded across social media, hashtag Karoline wins and hashtag truth over noise trended within minutes. Commentators admitted on live TV that something seismic had shifted. Even her critics couldn't ignore it. Headlines flashed, Leavitt dominates debate, Swalwell silenced. Clips of her one-line clapbacks replayed endlessly, each time drawing new eyes, new believers. Karoline's closing line struck like a gavel, America doesn't belong to the loudest politician in the room. It belongs to the people brave enough to demand the truth. And after tonight, no one will mistake shouting for strength again. With that, she stepped back, not as a debater, but as a figure who had seized the national stage. For Eric, the night was a career setback. For Karoline, it was her arrival, a defining moment when America saw her not just as a fighter, but as the future. Tonight was never about winning a debate. It was about proving that truth has more weight than noise, and that courage will always outlast fear. They can try to shout us down, mock us, or even threaten us, but every time they do, they only show how weak their arguments truly are. America deserves leaders who don't just talk over the people, but who fight for the people. And if tonight showed us anything, it's this: the future doesn't belong to those who yell the loudest, it belongs to those who stand their ground and refuse to be silenced. That is the America I believe in, and that is the America we will fight to restore together.